Sue with the Des Moines Register. Hi, Rekha.
Good morning. Nice to see you.
You too.
This is a new time slot for me. A little disorienting,
Yeah.
but I'm
Well-
getting my bearings.
Well, me too. This is a little different job for me as well. So we're doing it together.
Excellent. We will wade our way through it.
Yeah, we'll get through it. So what you got going today? What's on?
So I don't know if you remember the series that I wrote recently. It was a 4-part series about sexual abuse in the Trainer school system. And Trainer is in western Iowa, close to Council Bluffs. So the series examined allegations, and actually some proven ones, that the school superintendent had been informed years ago, as far back as 10, 11 years ago, about a coach and teacher who was sexually abusing female students, and had done nothing about it. Basically, the man remained on the payroll, and there was nothing in his files. So clearly nothing very significant as far as penalties, as far as discipline took place.
No documentation.
There was what is new and what triggered my series was that these emails turned up from 2005, 2006 that showed that the superintendent was made aware and actually even responded to some writers and people who spoke to him in person, acknowledging the problem and saying it would be dealt with. Now it turns out, nothing ever happened. So this is kind of what a columnist commentator lives for, is that moment when the community just gets so exercised by what has been going on that they turn out at a school board meeting in mass and say enough. And this is what happened Monday night at a school board meeting in Trainer. I went out there and spent the night in the area and attended the meeting, and speakers were just really impassioned, and they said these students basically, were sacrificed because the superintendent didn't take any action, and they were calling for his removal. And there was, of course, a little bit of backlash. The superintendent actually interrupted when one of the speakers was talking and said, no, that's not true, which seemed a little lacking in decorum because the superintendent is supposed to allow speakers to speak. One person did, however, speak up in his defense, and she said the Des Moines Register series, i.e. my series, was actually making new victims of people in the name of advocacy for victims of sexual assault, because I was victimizing the superintendent. So that was kind of an interesting take on it. Yeah, and she said she actually likened it to bullying. And she said,
that's kind of a stretch.
I thought it was a bit of a stretch. I was then confronted outside in the hallway by the superintendent's wife, who is a teacher in the district, who wondered if I had come to write about anything positive in the district. And, I understand people.
Well, if there's a positive story, I'm sure you would write about it.
Right, but I didn't go there looking for positive stories is the thing. I was following a particular story which had to do with the sexual abuse of students and how it was mishandled. And I just wanted to see the responses. Now, the community is left feeling very frustrated because there was no action taken, no real acknowledgement by the board or the superintendent of anything, even after this was all documented.
Really? Okay.
And they
never owned up to it.
Never owned up to it. And the fact is, they wouldn't even have been allowed to speak, the community, unless there had been an item on the agenda related to this. And the item on the agenda was that there was a pre-scheduled superintendent performance review that was going to be taking place in closed session at the end of the meeting. So this gave them the opportunity at the beginning of the meeting to stand up and talk about it.
Yeah.
But there was no response, no formal response, no action taken. And as far as we know, he might have gotten just a fine performance review. We will never know what his performance review said.
So it's
because
confidential.
It's confidential.
Okay.
Exactly. So people are feeling extremely frustrated and feeling like the board is just not answering to them and the superintendent is not answering to them, and they want action taken. It's at the point where enough talk and now let's do something. So the one hope is pinned on September 20th, which is going to be the date of a special school board election. Someone just recently stepped off the board to move out of the district. And there is a woman who's running by the name of Heidi Gutau Fox, and she's been a huge advocate for these students. And she, the hope is that if she wins a seat, then she will take on the administration and also challenge her fellow board members to do something. So,
did the superintendent during this give any reasoning as to his actions, as to why this kind of just left this alone?
No, he basically he didn't have actually a forum in which to speak during this meeting, but he kind of in the middle interjected, well, did I know? Was it proven that I knew? And, then he, without saying that he didn't, but then he would say the allegations were untrue. That's not true. That's not true. He was shaking his head, but that's it. And then his wife, who was also there sitting in the front row, said, same thing, it's not true. But it was not very satisfactory because one didn't get him rebutting point by point the evidence that showed that he was aware and didn't take any action. So this, I think, is the frustration. But what I think is happening is this small community, a lot of people are finally waking up to the fact that, it's not necessarily useful to always defer to those in power, that sometimes you have to challenge them. And one woman who spoke, who I thought was the most compelling, said, we, for a long time, we just assumed that the school district and the superintendent and the board would do the right thing. And now it's time for us residents to own that and say that didn't happen.
And we've seen, I mean, time after time after time, from Penn State on down to different, that does not always happen.
It doesn't work if people stay silent. And I got a lovely letter from a woman, I believe she lives in the district today, saying, it would take so long to explain to you what is this phenomenon that goes on in a small town that makes people so deferential to power and reluctant to speak up, but it's got to change. And, thank you for motivating.
Do either one of these individuals potentially face any legal ramifications from this?
Well, that's a good question. Now, this superintendent has already faced ramifications from the State Board of Educational Examiners, which ruled last year, or earlier this year, I've lost track of time now in all of the sequence of events, I think it was last year, that he had been aware of his own son having admitted to sexually abusing students. The son was a student at the school, but also was working in summer as a janitor, and yet the superintendent allowed him to keep working with access to vulnerable females. So they sanctioned him by giving him a 30-day suspension of his superintendent's license, which the board allowed him to serve over the summer. So basically it didn't affect, his job at all. But legal ramifications, that's unclear, and nobody has really even talked about that yet. Right now people just want him to leave, want a clean house, want a new board. And there is some board members were elected in the aftermath of all of this, claiming to clean up house, or pledging to, but two of them have left, and one has been totally sidelined by the rest of the board, and has become a scapegoat for everything bad that happens, all the bad press, because that's really what matters, is the community getting a black eye as opposed to seeking justice.
So where do they go from here then?
Well, the next step is the election. The next step is the board election, and that if this woman who's a victim advocate is elected, Heidi, then I think a lot of things could happen. I mean, she could really, because she's a lawyer, she knows the law very well on sexual abuse, and she's fearless. She's not going to be cowed. So, if the community really cares enough about this whole thing, I would say that they would elect her, and then we will start to see her hold the superintendent accountable. One person asked me privately before the school board meeting if it was possible that she could just filibuster in the way that we've been seeing in Congress until he agrees to resign or something. But I'm sure she has a lot of tricks in her bag.
Does she have the support, do you think?
I think she's getting the support. I mean, if last night or Monday night was any example, it really seems like the tide is turning in that community, and the silent majority, or at least that's the way one person characterized herself, is now becoming the vocal majority. So I think she stands a very good chance.
How big is the community?
It's about 900 people.
900 people. So we're talking very, very small.
Very small.
So
it's
and
a very small community.
Very close knit.
Yeah, people have been there for 4 generations, sending their kids to school in this district, and they graduated, and they feel a real sense of ownership of this town. And you can see why. It's a beautiful little community, and young women who were some of the victims talk about this perfect life that they had growing up. They idealized it, and now to find themselves so unsupported when something bad happens, it's just been devastating. One of them moved away to the Dominican Republic right after the interview with me, and she is sitting there and getting a lot of affirmation and support. Fortunately, I've heard from her, and it was posted on her Facebook page, and she was very reluctant to speak initially, but since then she's gotten so much support that I think she's felt empowered. Another young woman who was a victim of the superintendent's son went and spoke to an alternative school about her experiences. She had never spoken up about it before publicly, and she also got a lot of support. So victims are feeling empowered to come forward and share their experiences and not being further victimized by the stigma, the victim shaming that often happens when someone has been sexually assaulted.
Well, Rekha, thank you. I'm very, I hope the folks at home are eager to find out what happens with this story as it continues to progress down the road.
Thank you. It's just, I mean, it's just one community, but you know this sort of thing is replicated across the country in small communities and large ones. So it's very important to follow this and see what happens.
All right, folks, we're going to head to break right now. We're going to leave you with a live shot of the brand new Fairway store in Johnston on Merle Hay Road. Check it out if you get a chance. Great new store.